Hey, I'm Di McQueen, licensed clinical social worker, family and addiction expert. I'm here with Dr. Brian Jackson, my longtime cohort who specializes in the field of addiction. Welcome to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction.
Di and I have worked with addicts, alcoholics, and their families for over 30 years combined. Our podcast and coaching programs focus on families who have a loved one suffering from addiction. Our experience has been that this disease affects families as much, if not more, than the addict or alcoholic.
Is your world spinning out of control? Are you codependent? Are you experiencing worry, loss of sleep, and difficulty concentrating? If so, you're in the right place. Brian and I have both personally lived it, learned it, and now we're going to teach you tools and techniques on how to get your life back that you thought was shattered by addiction.
Okay, let's dive in.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Brian Jackson, and I am here with my partner, Miss Diane McQueen, who is a licensed clinical social worker, a master's level certified addiction professional, and an advanced accelerated resolution therapist. So lots of titles, but she's earned every one of them, and she is great at every one of them. And today we wanted to do a podcast that is specific to families. I mean, there is mention of the addict in there, but there's different roles that family members can play in the midst of addiction. And we have said many times that addiction is a family disease, and there's no doubt about it because there's not anybody in the family that's not touched by it either directly or indirectly. So we wanted to talk about something that's been around for a while, and psychologists, psychiatrists, substance use professionals have identified and look at this and see it all the time, and that's the 7 family roles in addiction. And these 7 roles frequently show up in households that are experiencing addiction. So households that are experiencing addiction. So it's all inclusive. And we can't escape it, but we need to learn tools as to how to handle the white tornado in the house. So within the family, we have the addict, right? So they are the central figure in the family whose behavior impacts all other family dynamics. The addicted loved one will likely have dependent behaviors as they attempt to support an active drug or alcohol habit. So in extreme cases, the addict may resort to stealing, lying, and manipulating everyone around them to secure the next hit or drink or whatever it is. And so that is really confusing for, you knew the person the way they were, all of a sudden they have a substance use problem, and so many things that they're doing are out of character, and you're just shaking your head going, what happened to them? And so we have other family members now taking on different roles. So Di, do you want to
Absolutely, of course. Enter the caretaker, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Enter the caretaker. Hey, by the way, hi, this is my great partner, Dr. Brian Jackson, who is a doctor of addictive disorders and a CAP himself, and also fabulous at what he does, and it's always a pleasure. So let's talk about this caretaker person. This is the person who devotes all of their energy into maintaining the balance within the family, right? So they're always trying to make sure everybody is harmonious. And they do it, of course, at their own expense. So caretakers fall into that increasingly more dysfunctional role, in the family to try to keep everyone happy at all times. And, they believe that everyone, if they could just get along, all these issues would go away and we won't have to address all of them. And as the addict begins to worsen, the caretaker begins to worsen, typically. Right? So, everything starts to escalate. So as they start getting more dependent, more sick, the caretaker genuinely and generally starts to also escalate. And we start to see them getting more and more worn out, more and more concerned, calling everybody, checking on everything. And we start to see that role unfold, which brings us to that next role, which you would know anything about.
I want to talk a little bit more about the caretaker. So I think it's this delusion that if we could just keep everything calm, within the family, or this addict thing will either go away or not be, the center of attention for the family. So it's almost like playing that whack-a-mole game. So
Yes.
this poor caretaker, something happens with this person in the family that's upset about it, so she goes deals with that, or something happens within the household, or something happens with the addict, and it's exhausting.
It's
But they're
exhausting.
really trying to keep everybody happy. But as you said, Di, it's really at their expense. And those are the ones that get totally worn out. If you think about being a caretaker in any situation, say you have an elderly uh, parent and the other parent is, trying to lug them around, trying to take care of them. And you go over there and the caretaker looks worse than the person who's
Well,
who's
and
ill.
usually, I mean, truth be told, right? Oftentimes the caretaker is the one that falls apart first because, or is the one that ends up in the hospital or, cracks finally. And Lord knows, I mean, I'm the first one to admit a long time ago, right?
Yeah,
As
you
I've
did
shared
it for
with
a
you,
long time. You did it for a
I
long
was
time.
it. I was that consummate caretaker running from place to place to place, always trying to figure out, how to make everybody okay. And at the end of the day, it really is almost debilitating,
Well, to
if
that
they
point,
let it.
Di, do you mind like personal disclosure as to how you were able to finally step out of that role of the caretaker? Because I know how you are as a person after knowing you for so long. You like people to be happy. I mean, and you go out of your way too. A lot of times I see to make people happy, but not in a bad way.
Well, I mean, it can be, right? So I think, thank you for asking that. No, I have no problem with personal disclosure. And, it really, I mean, the height and worst was obviously with the years and years of dealing with an addict that was really, in psychosis most of the time and things like that, and trying to get everybody in his family, okay, because there was always someone not paying their taxes or, someone in jail or someone in the hospital or whatever. And so, that was a chronic state of being. So, what did I do? I started really hunkering down on learning about myself and where my lines to take care of myself were. So, that little thing called a boundary, for instance, I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea that there was this thing that you could do to kind of help yourself. But for, the other part of it was just getting to know. I had lost myself so deeply in all this that I had to pull way back and really start to learn, like, who am I? What, who do I want to be? Um, and the funniest thing is I still do many, many kind things for people, but now I do them A, because I want to, and B, not that I didn't want to before, but a lot of times I didn't want to, and there was a lot of resentment that went with it. So I'm not doing that anymore. And we're stepping through that fear of going, like, if I don't do this, they're gonna die, or something really dramatic is gonna happen, and it's gonna be my fault. And when I realized, you know what? These are adults we're talking about here. Now, children, we have a different story, and you and I both agree on that. But as adults, like, I'm just not that powerful. So I had to make myself quite a bit smaller and realize that I'm just not all that, and that my job is not to save every single one of them. And so it's a great question. I had to learn how to kind of bring it on back to, let's begin with me. When I start getting worn out and tired, what else can I do? Who else can I defer to? And if I can't, it's, at the end of the day, it's really not mine in most cases. When I've done all that I can do, I have to step aside and let the chips fall where they may. I had to learn how to detach. I had to learn how to be kinder to myself. And that wasn't cruel and mean. And I mean, just genuinely learn how to take care of me. And that was quite a challenge, to be honest with you. But I think I'm doing much better. Um, if I'm being truthful, right? I think you would agree, even knowing me all these years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, your radar is up and you are not going to co-sign, people's, that you care about, whether they're friends or family, bad behavior or something that's really toxic. You have the ability now to say, you know what, I can't fix this, and I'm gonna, I'll be available if they want to do something positive
Positive.
and
Yes.
do something with your life.
Which
Which
doesn't
leads
mean we
us
don't
to the
think.
hero, number
Well, yes,
three.
and I was going to say, and you wouldn't know anything about it being a hero, right? Well, how are
Right.
you in
This
the
is so
family of
funny as I
origin?
read this. It's often the eldest child, which I was and am, or perfectionist, a type A person. Oh my goodness. They will strive for perfection in all things in order to compensate for the family issues. Heroes believe that everything will be okay if they just attain a new level of success and leadership. However, these self-induced expectations cause anxiety, depression, resentment, and other mental health challenges. So, I mean, growing up, I mean, I was in the National Honor Society. So, both parents alcoholic, right? So, National Honor Society, all county swimmer, member of the golf team, accepted to, all kinds of, fancy universities. But at the end of the day, none of that was fulfilling. And I certainly didn't get any attaboys for it, which is what I was looking for.
Right.
It was almost like an expectation. And so I did suffer from great levels of anxiety, which I did self medicate with alcohol and substances. So it's interesting, I mean, to me, to read this, number one, and to be able to relate to it, number two, but to also realize that if you look at the caretaker, you look at the hero, these are people trying to do whatever they can to get some degree of normalcy in a situation where there's nothing but lunacy. And that in and
Exactly.
of itself, is so that didn't work. That
Well, it's
didn't change.
interesting, right? I mean, how these roles we take them on. But it's also interesting that the next one is the scapegoat, and you know, I turned into the caretaker, but growing up, I was a combination between the scapegoat and the mascot, which was super interesting. But the scapegoat is the role in a dysfunctional family that is often with the youngest, sometimes the middle child, depending on how many kids there are. And that's the one who's usually blamed for all the problems.
Were you the middle
And
one or the youngest?
I'm youngest. Yep.
Youngest, okay.
Youngest of
Yeah.
all. Yep. And of course, because of this, they are incentivized to act out. See, because here's the thing about a scapegoat, right? Is a lot of times kids, by the time they get to the youngest one, and there's all this dysfunction going on, and the hero is doing all these wonderful things and getting, accolades, or at least someone often does notice. Unfortunately, in your family, because everything was really messed up, they didn't even notice how great you were. But in my family, oh yeah, my brother was the hero, and everyone thought he walked on water. My sister was the beautiful one, and so she was the one that everybody was like, "Oh my God, she's gorgeous." All the guys liked her, etc. And then there was Di, and Di, not playing the victim here, but Di was like, you couldn't do enough. I was the one when you got to school, the teacher was like, "Oh my God, you're so and so's little brother, little sister," right? I'm like, "Oh God, here we go again." So, how do you get noticed? You act out. And guess what? All of a sudden, people start.
You were good at that. You were good
I
at
was
that.
really good at that, right? And, I was actually really smart and doing all the right things. That never got me noticed. So when I started doing the wrong things, oh boy, did that start getting everybody's attention, but not in the way that I kind of thought it would. It like really pissed everybody off. My mother was, she was always just raving and, not happy. So, they were, like I said, incentivized to act out and get into new trouble so they could divert the attention from the people sometimes above, but also, they were really able to, deal with the blame and the anger. And I had, a lot of anger. Um, I didn't know it. I would have told you I was the calmest person and not angry about anything. But later on, when I got into recovery myself, I realized, oh my God, I have so much anger. And it said, the bottom line says that they estrange themselves from many people within the family, which I also did. So when I moved out very young, for a long time, I mean, I would talk to my family, but I didn't see them. I lived 3,000 miles away. Most of them were in California. I was in Boston, and that was methodically chosen so that I wouldn't have to deal with them except on, those yearly excursions that you had to go out there and do something. In my younger days, that's really what I did. So interesting. Um, and, it does get you a lot of attention, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily the kind of attention that most of us really want. So it moves us into that mascot, which was my dual role, by the way.
Yeah,
So
because that's usually the youngest one, but it's
yep.
common for the mascot to be the youngest person in the family. So they use humor as a coping mechanism to bury their own fears, and diffuse tension and gain approval from those around them. The mascot is often emotionally fragile. They are unequipped to deal with negative feelings, so they become the jokester to protect themselves from the turbulent dynamics around them. Mascots often believe they can change everyone around them, make them happy and laughing, then the problems they witness will cease to exist.
And
So again,
that's,
another effort in futility, right? So
it
I
sure
mean,
was.
people, with the family members are trying. They're like, we don't know what this is. Why is the addict doing what they're doing? What can we do to help something that they're completely powerless over? And so, unfortunately, these roles are very common in families where people are just doing double time to try and divert the sadness
Attention.
and the
Yeah.
sickness of the addict from the dynamics of the family.
And humor is a wonderful tool when it's used properly, right? When it's used properly, sometimes that is a really good technique, but, and when you really mean it. But when you're doing it more out of fear-based, and certainly that was it. But, I always thought if I could get everybody to lighten up a little bit, and it used to become like the thing where, my mother would leave me these messages going, "Oh, wow, isn't it great to always be so happy and bubbly?" And there was a lot of deflection, although I'm genuinely a pretty happy person. There was times where I was covering up a lot of sadness by, making
Right, and
jokes.
then sometimes the humor becomes like a defense mechanism,
Oh, for sure.
right? We're gonna cut this conversation real quick because I'm going to tell a joke or be funny or something because you're never going to get to put the magnifying glass and receive what's really
Right.
going on with me.
And what was really happening into that household, right? With everybody everybody's paralyzed with this stuff. So moving along, we have our sixth family role, which is the lost child. And this is the child that's kind of quiet, maybe withdrawn and overlooked, and oftentimes is kind of the middle child. But it doesn't always have to be, especially if you have a lot of kids. There's somebody in there that has gotten very quiet, sort of isolates themselves. They're less involved in the drama and disagreement that stems from all this dysfunction in these roles, right? They just kind of but they also receive a whole lot less attention because they're the quiet one. They're fine. They're just off, forgotten, in their room somewhere. They isolate and they tend to sometimes estrange themselves from the rest of the family. Um, the behavior can actually have negative effects on relationships later on because now they just really don't want to interact a lot and they get overwhelmed with this stuff quite easily and a lot of anxiety. So, what happens when you're raised as the lost child going into the future can be problematic at times because, it's not the way that you want to have a relationship with someone isolating and not discussing things and trying to stay out of the middle of, you know,
Yeah, the lost child does everything they possibly can to become invisible.
invisible. That's right. And that's
And
really sad when you think about it. And they do it quite
it is
well.
sad. It is sad because yes, and so it's almost like where's Joey? We
Right.
haven't seen him forever.
Hey, listen, when you and I have both had clients where they tell us stories of, the family actually forgetting them somewhere,
Right.
because they're like you just said, almost invisible and everybody else is in this total mayhem, chaos. And all of a sudden they get home and Joey is still back at the circus that they were just all at,
At the
performing
house. At the
themselves,
house.
performing themselves, right? There you go. Oh my goodness. Yes,
We're,
and
we're laughing. We're laughing with this because we have
with
these
you because
experiences. So we're not
we've been
laughing at
half
you.
these roles. And by the way, everybody can bounce from role to role. It's not like you have one role and that is your only role always, although there's usually a predominant role. I mean, that's usually true. And, like with you and I, they kind of changed as we, came out of the house into our own lives. Instead of being a scapegoat and whatever, I became the enabler and caretaker, which is perfect, right? So, but trying not to do that so much anymore. So tell us about the enabler, B.
Yeah, and before I do, like I like these, they're not bullet points, there's some paragraphs on each one of these, but for those of you that are listening out there that are family members that have somebody that you love in active addiction, I think it's important for you to hear these things. And I think some of them will speak to you to, define what role am I playing and how is this affecting me? And am I being my true authentic self, or am I trying to be something else to manage this disease that's permeating the house? And that's something that we don't really want to do, because that's not healthy for us. So, seven, the final one is the enabler. This person will enable the addict by supporting them, making excuses for their behavior, lying to everyone around them, and not creating boundaries with the addict. Although the enabler can be anyone, it is most often a parent, grandparent, or older sibling. While enablers mean well and genuinely believe that they are doing the right thing, their behavior makes the problem of addiction and family dysfunction worse. So it's almost like having a wild card. So everybody's playing their role, and maybe we all get together and say, "Hey, let's not give any money to Johnny because he's going to go, buy booze or drugs or whatever." And there's always some outlier that will, sneakily give them money or something and think that they're helping them or being kind. Um, so what we don't want to do is co-sign their addiction, perpetuate the addiction by enabling them, because by enabling them, you are not helping them. And it seems cruel to cut them off, but if you cut them off, they might have a consequence that opens up their eyes that, hey, I got to do something about this myself. So,
Right. It's so true, right? And the other side of that is the enabler often, again, as most of these roles are, there's a lot of fear-based stuff going on here.
oh,
And,
absolutely.
even though we think we're helping, really we're doing a lot of things out of the emotion of fear. And it's designed, it's obviously covered up by a lot of these things that we're doing. Again, one of those things is coming into the light and really understanding that, by letting other people sort of make their choices, that doesn't mean don't help, but, you kind of understand who this person is and what they're doing. It really changes the dynamic. There's nothing to be afraid of as an adult, and recognizing I am not, because there's so much guilt and shame and fear and taking on other people's responsibilities for their own actions. When I started to understand that, boy, wow, did that change everything for me, and the way that I would handle these same situations moving forward. And boy, that's really, and so I think that's really the beginning of how to break the cycle, right? Which is the first step, is to understand what roles do you play. Like if you understand your role in the family of addiction, you can then get some help to kind of work through those and understand what things you need to do to start to take that apart. So, there's kind of, really important things to understand about that. And as you're working through this, I think it's important. We're talking about a family right now. So we're assuming that the addict is probably a child, or, or a parent itself.
Spouse.
Yeah. So we're going to give you a few solutions for, for addict prevention, if you are in fact like the parents of these children, to help you kind of understand that you really have to go through, and there are some things you can do to try to help set up the family for success, rather than, set up the family in these different roles. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
So, I guess it's important too to, like, sometimes we can't see these things. Hopefully, if you're listening, you might say, "Oh, me too. My God, that's me. That's me." And then we got to figure out how to get out of that role, how to be our true authentic selves, how to disconnect from the addiction. That's the dysfunction in the family. So
Exactly. And I think that takes help, really, truly. I think you can, read some books and stuff, but I think the truth is, most of us need a little help and guidance in that capacity and some people that we can talk to. That's a big one. But if we even bring it back further and we have some of these, parental figures trying to help people or the kids understand, different areas that they can foreseeably prevent some of this stuff, I figure we might as well bring it to people's attention. So
yeah, and
first and foremost,
I think the key to all of these 7 traits, we see in a family is it's important to remember that it's not your fault. And that's the underlying, like you said, the fear die, and maybe this underlying thing that I have something to do with this, and what can I do to fix it? And you're trying to fix something that's not fixable until the addict wants to get fixed. So, I mean, we strongly recommend, it's not easy to operate a certain way and then go, okay, I get it, and operate another way without some help. So, you can get a free consultation with us at www.familyandaddictionexperts.com. You can schedule 30 minutes free consultation with us. We're more than happy to hear what's going on in the dynamics of your family and let you know whether or not we think we are the right fit in terms of trying to help you. We're probably going to put this article in the Family Survival Kit because you might listen to the podcast, but we'll have a printout in there of the 7 different roles that people play in the family. And if you want to ask us a question, you can email us at info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. And that's A-N-D. And we look forward to hearing from you. Di, I think this is a good topic, and it speaks obviously to your life, my life, and I would imagine to many, many people who are listening out there.
absolutely. And as always, we try to just give you some information, but there is so much more to each of these topics that we can go into. So don't hesitate to ask. We're so happy that you guys joined us today.
All right, Di, thank you so much, and I will see you on the next one.
Sounds like a plan, man. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks so much for joining our podcast, Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more important tools, techniques, and ways for you to focus on you instead of the alcoholic or addict in your world.
Until then, please go to our website, familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's familyandaddictionexperts.com. You'll also see links to our Facebook and Instagram pages. Please also, if you have any emails that you would like to send us, that's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. With any thoughts, feelings, questions that you may have for us, we would love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.